Meet Bren. He recently joined 3D Beast Academy.
Hey JL, I created an assault rifle model to practice hard surface modeling and weapon design, but I've been struggling with topology issues, especially in sub-D modeling. I often encounter errors like creasing, pinching, and vertices being merged, and it's really challenging, especially without guidance. So, do you have any tips for troubleshooting?
When Brent asked me for help, I jumped at the chance to assist my student and also challenge myself to step outside my comfort zone, switching from Maya to Blender, a software that I'm still learning. I promised Brent a sub-D model with perfect topology in 7 days. A week? Am I gonna be able to deliver this on time? I got this. I'm a beast. I'm a 3D modeling beast. I'm a 3D modeling beast. What's going on? Maybe I don't got this. What the? With my calendar booked for months and this being the only week open, it's now or never. Will I be able to conquer a Blender workflow to transform Bren's rifle model into a VFX ready masterpiece with quad topology? Or will this challenge question my 3D modeling beast title? Join me as I race the clock to learn new tools and workflows in Blender, share practical 3D modeling tips, and help a fellow 3D artist stay on his 3D journey. Stay tuned and witness this 3D model's topology transformation. I started with the railing body. I kind of had to make the names of some of these parts up as they didn't have a real life counterpart to a rifle. I copied each piece I was going to work on and pasted it into a clean collection, keeping my Blender scene organized. This was a good confidence builder to start out in Blender because it's a relative simple shape with lots of flat planes. Flat surfaces are much more forgiving than curved surfaces in sub-D modeling. I started to rebuild each part based on the existing model. This approach isn't always ideal as some of the meshes can take more time to clean up than remodeling from a clean base. However, without any other references besides this file, this was the approach that I was going to have to take. First, I removed all the holding edges and created large even quads. N-gons are okay at this point, but I wanted a clean base before reinforcing edges with bevels. Using bevels as holding edges is a quick way to add all your holding edges at once, and it's a habit worth developing. Here's the settings in Blender. Miter outer should be set to arc. This will give you a better edge layout to quickly quad these corners out. 2 segments. This adds an edge loop on either side, retaining your sharp edges. Shape should be at 1. This prevents the introduction of a chamfer. In other software like Maya, simply disable the chamfer option to get a nice flat corner with a edge on either side. I did spend some time manually cleaning up bevels, which is a part of perfecting edge spacing. Mastering topology means having ultimate control of edge flow, as automated process like bevelings can leave messy results in some areas. This corner requires some work to quad out. Remember, you could run an edge into a try to quad it out. The knife tool in Blender, along with axis constraints, is the lifesaver for continuing edges from bevels. I use a reflective surface to test my surfaces and spot any issues. Reflective surfaces easily show imperfections. In Maya, you could use a blend, Fong, or reduce the roughness or increase the metalness for a similar effect. Building up my confidence in Blender, I tackled the scope next. I repeated the process of stripping away all the holding edges and trying to build some quads, especially for the larger shapes, focusing on the corners because I know that those corners are going to need more topology to properly hold those edges. I always work on half of the model, yet I use a mirror modifier to give me a visual reference of what the finished shape will look like. With limited time, I built a library of most used commands via quick favorites. Mirrors work based off the object's origin, so setting the cursor to origin as a quick favorite is a game changer. I deleted some of the model's details, like these lines right here, as they would be more efficient to create in the texture phase. I rebuilt the bolts, focusing on the centralized details first, which dictate the overall radius in this cylinder's density. Once the proper topology is in place, I extrude it out and I use the loop tools add-on and circle function. And in Maya, this is called the circularized components. After creating the bolt, I tackled the large inset where these would be housed, using a large cylinder with the same resolution to boolean out a shape. Since these shapes were housed on a flat plane, I only had to build it once and then duplicate it. And then I would be able to stitch and connect this to the other side, ensuring perfect topology across both shapes. I use a similar process for the bolt openings near the scope's lens. However, I created an inset and using the loop tool's circle function instead of a Boolean's cutout. With most details fleshed out, I finished the scope by using the knife tool to connect my bevels to quad everything out, cleaning up the topology. I duplicated and placed the remaining bolts, built the large cylindrical shape, and mirrored all my shapes. I decided not to rebuild this top railing right now due to time constraints, and it looks relatively clean, but I might revisit this if I have enough time. The first days officially in the books, transitioning from Maya to Blender really tested my muscle memory, especially grappling with object versus edit mode, which is quite different in Maya. Now, I did tackle some of the simpler parts first, which was kind of a confidence builder. However, there's still a bunch of more complex parts left to build. Only 6 days left, and I'm already starting to feel like I might be in way over my head. Tomorrow, I got to make up some serious ground. Before we continue, don't forget to grab your free copy of the Hard Surface Cheat Sheets. I've packed this guide with my best topology secrets refined over the years to help you quickly elevate your 3D modeling to professional standards. Click the YouTube card right here to get your free guide. Today, my goal is to complete this entire large part. I'm cleaning up shapes by removing the previous destructive bevels, which alter the base shape. I start to quad out the large sections, although having everything quadded is not necessarily on this first pass of cleanup. You can see I'm left with a clean shape that I can now start refining. I jumped around different parts of this section. This part had many issues, so I reduced it to 2 flat planes and extruded down. Extruding parts with problem topology usually compounds issues by passing down problematic topology through the extrusion. For problematic parts with extruded depth, it's often quicker to rebuild the flat planes first, allowing the extrusion to carry over your topology. I repeated the process of removing holding edges, cleaning up phases by building up large quads, introducing holding edges, and applying a final pass to connect smaller polygons from bevels to ensure quad topology. For the back of the stock, these detached details are often called floaters. They can be offset from the mesh, and the details can be baked down into normal maps. So while these are perfectly fine for a game production, in a sub-D workflow, these must be properly connected to the mesh. So I start by working on one half. I separate this shape into 2 parts. I have a section with the grip details, which I can bridge down between them to create this wall. Since these connect to a flat area, I won't have many issues. Now, it's a matter of connecting both parts. The detached area with the grip details was much denser. This issue needs to be corrected since the detailed parts are much denser than the main body we're connecting it to. Manually adding topology to match edge counts is often too time consuming. A better workflow is to use a subdivision modifier to subdivide our mesh for a proper connection. First, we got to tell Blender which edges are going to be hard to hold or shape. So we do so by selecting all hard edges and setting the mean crease value to 1. Then we apply a level 1 subdivision modifier to bake in that subdivision, which also smooths out our curvature. The Maya equivalent is to use the crease tool, applying a level 1 smooth and then deleting the history. Now we join both parts, introduce holding edges, and add a small panel line, extruding back along the normals to sell the illusion of separate parts. With the smaller pieces completed around the rear body, I decided to call it a day. I try to find the real names of the rifle parts. However, some of these had nothing really that matched, so I kind of had to wing a lot of these names. I didn't get as far as I hoped. My original plan was to finish 1 major part per day, and I didn't get to achieve that. So I'm officially 1 day behind schedule, and tomorrow's goal is to finish this part no matter what. I'm back at it today with the same section. My first task was to rebuild these small rivets. The plan is to model this once, duplicate it, and stitch this throughout the mesh. I used an 8-sided circle as my base, which I prefer for cylindrical shapes because it provides perfect symmetry lines across both axes. I modeled all these details and added holding edges to complete the final base shape. Using face snapping ensured that I was on the same exact plane, crucial for reconnecting these pieces without causing dents in subdivision mode. Then I duplicated this rivet and placed it throughout the rest of the model. I repeated this process to create the radial inset and stitch both parts into the mesh to see how good they fit. So far, so good. For this vent, I cut out the shape with the knife tool and added a bevel to create a nice boundary loop. Boundary loops are great for isolating details and rerouting your edge flow inward towards your pockets of details. I worked my way up the mesh, connecting the rest of the rivets and reworking some edge flow to reduce endgons. I added bevels as holding edges for the larger cutouts. Since this shape was isolated, reinforcing these edges is okay. However, for connected edges, I highly recommend doing all your bevels in one swoop for reinforcing edges. I continued merging rivets and peel shapes into the mesh. If bevels aren't working for you and the mesh is clean, it might be a flip normals issue. Simply activate face orientation in viewport overlays, and red faces will mean that your normals are reversed. Select these faces and go to Mesh, Normals, Flip. Your faces are now blue and the bevels should now work flawlessly. To create this cutout, I duplicated the mesh and used a Boolean cutout for a perfect subtraction. Booleans work best with watertight meshes, so fill any large holes before running Boolean's operations. With all the details set, it was time to quad out the rest of the mesh and apply a bevel to create all the hard edges. And that's a wrap for day 3. It really felt good to knock out the rear body. By the end of the 3rd day, after another 12+ hour day in Blender, the muscle memory is definitely starting to get there. However, the axis constraints still feel a bit odd, especially after years of using the gizmo in Maya. However, I am starting to like those constraints because you can combine them with other tools to make them much more powerful. 4 days left before I link up with Bren and have to reveal the model, with lots of intricate parts left to do. So hopefully I can make up some ground now that I'm becoming a little bit more fluid in my Blender workflow. Now it's time to take on the railing. This repeatable pattern appears in several parts throughout the model, and creating clean, repeatable patterns is an essential skill for any hard surface artist to master. The first task is to break this down into one clean, tileable piece. I need to create half of a tileable piece and also the end caps, which are unique details. If I get these two parts to fit properly, the rest will be easy. Achieving clean topology involves knowing where to focus and where to let the 3D software replicate your clean meshes throughout the model. For this angle, since it's not a solid shape, I'm using the knife tool to create a manual bevel. If you hit C on the knife tool, you can cut all the way through. With those edges selected, hit V for the rip command. That will disconnect those components and create a new polygon island. Then you can hit L to select that polygon island and delete the faces. With that shape fleshed out, I selected the hard edges and beveled them to get my holding edges. By now you can see that this is a very formulaic process. After everything looks good in sub-D mode, I usually add an extra couple of loop cuts to make smaller squares. This uniformity divides your mesh and ensure your edges don't slide out too far when going into sub-D mode. Now that your pattern is done, it's time to add an array modifier to create the entire pattern. In Maya, you can use a duplicate special for a similar effect. With the pattern created, I mirrored the end cap, apply my array modifier, and merge all my vertices. Pattern complete. Now let's create the nozzle. The issue here with the topology is that there's a lack of density to support these corners properly. In sub-D modeling, especially for cylindrical shapes, details dictate density. Luckily, this can also be broken down into a repeatable pattern using what I call radial symmetry. I'm snapping this into the world origin, which will make our life much easier. Make sure your pivot or origin point is in the middle. This pattern repeats 6 times, so our initial cylinder needs to be evenly divisible by 6. Think of it as 6 slices of pie making a whole. I think 12 divisions per slice will give us the right density to hold those corners properly. 12 times 6 equals 72. Our initial circle will have 72 sides. Our slice has 12 faces. We only need to work on half since we'll work with symmetry. So we'll only select 6 faces and delete the rest. Using this method ensures that we can rebuild that one slice to rebuild that entire pie and apply a mirror modifier. To make the pattern, we need two things: an empty as a reference point and an array modifier to make the duplicates. Apply your transforms here, as this might cause issues. Now add your array and select an empty as your object offset. When we rotate our empty, we see the duplicates follow. We need to find out how many degrees to rotate each slice by. In the rotate Y, we divide 360 by 6, which gives us 60 degrees. So we set the count to 6 and we get our shape back. If you need instructions on how to do this in Maya, I've linked a tutorial in the description below. Our radial symmetry setup is now complete. We can work on half of a slice, and then the radial symmetry will update the entire shape. I deleted the faces to make the opening, leaving us with a clean shell. Let's add thickness by using a solidify modifier and applying it to bake it in. Using the scale tool, I added slanted edges and used the bevel to add my holding edges. My shapes are holding up well, so let's merge all the modifiers and apply another mirror modifier to create the entire piece. Now we can finish the piece by modeling the asymmetrical details. Always exploit symmetry first and leave asymmetrical details for the very end. Similar to how character artists flesh out a complete character in symmetry and then leave facial asymmetry for the very end. I created the rest of the nozzle as a separate part with a less dense cylinder. Remember, details dictate density. Since it's a simple cylindrical part, it doesn't need as dense as a mesh to support its shape. This took longer than expected, with plenty of trial and error, and it was quite frustrating. Workflows that I normally breeze through in Maya are taking so much longer in Blender. For instance, setting up radial symmetry with 3 modifiers was tricky to get a hold of. I'm getting the hang of Blender's modifier stack though, especially the solidify modifier, which is great for adding thickness to hard surface models. I didn't get through as many parts as I hoped for today. With 3 days left, it's crunch time, and I've got to push through. I can't let Brent down. Today I worked on this first grip. I started with the grip details, figuring out how to incorporate them into the main mesh. I like to tackle the more difficult areas of a model first, and usually merging these duplicate details back into the mesh are it. To ensure the base of these details lined up with the rest of the body, I stripped down one part of the pattern and applied a shrink wrap modifier. This ensured that the details fit back onto the surface once duplicated. Then I rebuilt the extruded details. When merging details back into the mesh, always ensure that your base shapes align. I rotated this pattern in world spacing and plan to rotate it back into place once finished. Working in world space, especially with patterns, makes accurate modeling much easier. I use the array modifier to create extra duplicates and compare it to the original. Once everything matched up and the details were clean, I moved on to the rest of the grip. I added loop cuts and quadded out most of my mesh. I like how simple but powerful the join feature in Blender is to connect different vertices with edges. With a clean base, I matched the subdivisions of the grip details to the rest of the body. I creased the hard edges and applied a sub-D modifier. With the divisions matched up, I joined the parts and started merging vertices. The last step was to add this ribbit detail. I copied the pattern from another previous piece, snapped it to the faces, and merged them throughout the mesh. Lastly, I selected all hard edges and applied bevels. Voila! The first set of grips are officially done, and I'm starting to feel pressure will take its grip. I'm getting comfortable with Blender by now, but it feels like there's always a new tool or modifier for me to research and having to spend time figuring out how to use. I'm fighting the urge to add too many modifiers to my stack and overcomplicating my workflow. This is kind of like working with Photoshop with too many layers, and at a certain point, you got to merge everything down and commit to some changes. With less than 48 hours until I reveal the model to Brent, I need to finish every part tomorrow and use that final day to work on scene cleanup, double check the entire model for any issues, and I'm thinking about doing a little extra surprise to really set this model off. Today, I'm working on the second grip. I started using a workflow similar to the previous grip. I borrowed the small pattern piece from a previous mesh, aligned it to world spacing, and created a repeatable pattern with the array modifier. I did the usual cleanup routine to create a clean base mesh, applied a sub-D modifier to match the subdivisions, and stitched my details onto the larger piece. I borrowed this rivet detail from another piece and stitched it into the corner. Remember, never remodel parts that are supposed to be the same when you can simply duplicate them from other parts and rejoin them back into your model. This keeps your topology uniform and your patterns consistent. I decided to model the bottom of the grip as a separate part. I can't tell from the original model what the bottom piece is, but I want to add a magazine here to support a reload animation. If you need to create parts that support animation, always model them as separate pieces. I remodeled the top of this grip, selected all my hard edges, and applied bevels to reinforce my shapes. Finally, I rotated the grip back into its original position. I just had a major setback. Windows decided to reboot, erasing all the quick favorites as I didn't save my preferences. So that nice hefty list of quick favorites is all gone, and now I have to spend time tracking down these tools within these commands to rebuild it. This is time that I simply just don't have. I finished 3D modeling the second grip, and I'm definitely much more fluid since I first started. I really like the redesign of the magazine that I did, especially remodeling it separately to a reload animation. Tomorrow I'm revealing the model to Bren, and I want to make sure that the model is as perfect as possible. I have one more day to go with zero room for error. Final day, it's now or never. I decided to revisit the top railing. I had already created this pattern from a previous part, so this would be an easy task. I broke down the pattern once more to one piece and rebuilt it to match the length of the top railing. Then I made sure that every part was properly mirrored. I finished the entire model, cleaned up the scene, and named each single part, which is actually a crucial practice, especially for teamwork environments like studio settings. I really wanted to impress Bren and show him the rifle coming together piece by piece. So I took it into Maya to make this cool animation of all the parts coming together. This is one of the advantages of modeling every part separately, is that you can do these cool breakaway animations. Some people actually call them exploded views. The model definitely ended up quite a bit different from the original file that Brent sent me. I had to make some design choices and leave out some of the areas that were unclear from his initial blockout. Some areas were simplified, and some other areas I would have left out and tackled in the texturing phase. Overall, I'm pleased on how it turned out. I hope Brent feels inspired when he sees it, and I wanted to show him that creating an asset like this with proper topology for sub-D is not impossible. It just takes a little bit of practice. So let's jump on the call and see what Brent thinks about the model. So this is what you sent me right here from your messages. You basically said that you wanted this to be a sub-D model with clean topology. So you went through the process of doing this, and this does look like a game asset. You have the floaters here and the creasing, but looks like you wanted to convert this into a sub-D model, and that's where topology, clean quad topology is going to come into play. So this is what you sent me, and I worked very hard to convert this game model into a sub-D model, and I could tell you're excited, and I'm excited to show you.
Whoa. It looks really good, man. Nice. Very nice, very nice.
That's it. So this is your model. I'll bring the updated version.
Yeah, I mean, it looks really good, man. Like, I'm speechless. It looks really good.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of work, and I actually did this in Blender, which I'm not that experienced. Yeah, the only reason I brought it back to Maya is to do the animation, because like I said, I'm relatively new with Blender, so but I documented the whole process. I had to do a lot of cleanup for the model, and It actually, I deviated quite a bit. I only went off that file and it looked like it was kind of a work in progress. I had to kind of like make some things up because I didn't have really any reference besides the model. There were a lot of things that were not clean, even in the low poly. Like a lot of the shapes were slanted. I basically had to like remove a lot of that geometry and kind of rebuild everything. I used much more subdivisions and I just started clean, adding holding edges and kind of gradually building up the divisions that really helped me out.
It looks really nice. Better than mine.
Sub-D modeling is pretty difficult. It's a craft that takes a while to learn, but there's a lot of modeling techniques too that would help you out, and you'll see throughout the video.
Basically, I just really wanted to do weapons because I haven't done weapons, and it's actually something that I really want to do as well. Aside from doing basically just hard surface modeling is something that I really wanted.
I think you'll kind of like really understand what it takes to convert, like a game model to sub-D, especially when I release the video. So if you got, any questions, I'm always around. You can catch me on Discord and, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yep, I'll sure will.
Okay, man. All right, have a great one.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah,
peace.
You too. Bye.
On the call, Brendan mentioned that this was indeed a video game asset that he started by following a tutorial. And I can kind of tell by the way that his initial model was and even the floaters that he had. So if you're interested in creating sci-fi weapons for video games, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the description down below so you can check out the tutorial. But essentially, Bren started trying to create a video game asset, and somewhere along the line, he decided that he wanted a VFX model with proper topology, started to struggle, and decided to ask me for help. So while his initial approach for creating the model for a video game workflow would have worked, the process that we went through in this video was necessary to convert it into a sub-D VFX model. So hopefully you enjoyed watching this entire process. What was your biggest takeaway from this video? Let me know in the comment sections down below. My second completed Blender model is officially in the books. If you thought I went through some Blender growing pains throughout this process and you want to check out how my Blender journey started with my first model, then you should check out this video right here.